Hey there, and welcome to this brief introduction to setting up your development environment so you can get started building add-ons for Adobe Express as quickly as possible. There are 3 approaches we'll cover in this video. Each can have their own circumstances where they might be the right fit for you, so let's just have a look at them and then you can decide which one you want to go to. Without any further ado, let's get started setting up our development environment. The first approach to quickly getting started with building add-ons is the so-called code playground. It is directly integrated into Adobe Express, so you won't need any additional pieces of software you might need to install for the other methods. Instead, all you need is an account for Adobe Express. A free one is sufficient. And then what you want to do is you want to click on your profile picture, go to Settings, and enable add-on development. Now, when you go to the Add-Ons tab on the left-hand side, click on your add-ons. At the bottom, you will find 2 new switches you can enable. Add-on testing is something we'll use later for when you build add-ons using a code editor installed on your system. But right now, we want to focus on the so-called code playground. So let's enable the code playground for now, and then you will get presented with a pop-up where Hamza explains to you how the code playground works, and then you can just select Start Coding and really get started. As you can see at the bottom, there is now a code editor that features 4 different tabs: HTML, CSS, iframe chairs, and document chairs. While the exact differences between these is a little bit more complicated and out of scope for this video, the main gist of it is that with HTML, you can define what features your panel might have. With CSS, you can define how that looks. With iframe chairs, you can define how your user interface behaves. And with the document chairs, you can finally make changes to your Express document with your add-on. There is also the Run Code button on the top right-hand side, or you can alternatively press Command-Shift-Enter or Control-Shift-Enter if you're on Windows, and then you can see that our add-on immediately appears. We have a button, we can click Create Rectangle, and with that, a rectangle got created. Really, what happened here was it loaded this very add-on, and here we have, and I'll try to make this a little bit bigger so you can better read it, a button with the ID Create Rectangle, which then creates the rectangle. In our CSS, we just style that rectangle a little bit, and then in our iframe chairs, what we actually do is we say, once everything's ready, once our add-on is loaded, we actually get the so-called runtime, which allows us to interact with other parts of the system. So for example, our document chairs, then we get ourselves a so-called script API, and we get our Create Rectangle button. This is just fairly standard JavaScript. So with that, if you're not familiar with that, I would recommend you to look into some getting started materials around learning JavaScript and coming back. And yeah, all we then do is when we click on that button, we await the Create Rectangle execution from our script API. So what is this script API, you might ask? Well, it's just a set of functions that we expose to our iframe chairs within our document chairs. So as you can see here, we actually call this start function at the bottom. So at the beginning, we really try to execute that. And here we have a so-called sandbox API, which contains a Create Rectangle function. You might remember we already saw that name, Create Rectangle, over in our iframe chairs. And then we just expose this sandbox API to our runtime, which essentially means that we can then retrieve this function using the runtime.api proxy function. Last but not least, our Create Rectangle function is rather straightforward. We just create a rectangle. We saw that. We created a rectangle. We set the width and height of this very rectangle. we also put it so that it's not immediately stuck to the top left, but 10 pixels to the right and 10 pixels down. We give it a color. You can actually define any color you want here. And then we assign it this color fill. And last but not least, we insert it into our document. That also means that you could now just make changes to this. So for example, let's say we don't want to have a rectangle anymore, but instead we can call create ellipse. And as you can see, it already gives us auto-completion suggestions about what we can do. So let's just create an ellipse and click run code again, or press Command-Shift-Enter or Control-Shift-Enter. And now, if I delete this and click Create Rectangle again, you can see that instead we get an ellipse. Of course, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that this still says Create Rectangle. So with that, we could just go into our HTML, change this text right here. So let's say Create Ellipse, run our code again. And as you can see, our plugin, or our add-on, now got updated, and we can click on Create Ellipse, and with that, everything works as expected. To be clear, you probably don't want to build your whole add-on within this experience. There's just a bunch of things that are much easier with the more fully fledged development environments that we'll get into in a few seconds. However, to play around with the APIs, maybe try if something works rather easily, or just to really get started, getting familiar with these APIs, this code playground can really help you to get started without any sort of bigger obstacles. While the code playground is great for just playing around with some of these APIs and getting started, once you want to actually build an add-on that you want to publish and distribute to others, you really want to get started with a local development environment. To do that, we need to have two things installed. The first of which is Node.js, and the second of which is a code editor. In this case, we'll use Visual Studio Code, which is a free code editor developed by Microsoft. With the Node.js website, so nodejs.org/en/download/package-manager, you can select a lot of different options. You can use a package manager. So for example, for macOS, we can use Homebrew. We can use something called NVM. We could even not install it at all and just use Docker. And yeah, you can also, if you feel more comfortable outside the command line or terminal, use one of the pre-built installers, which is basically just your normal installer for your operating system. And yeah. In this case, I'll just use Homebrew, which is a package manager for macOS. And so with that, I can just type brew install node into my terminal application. In this case, I use iTerm, which is a bit fancier than terminal, but you can use terminal just as well. And now Node.js is installed, and you can actually verify that by typing in node-v, which then should print out the version number. Don't worry too much if this is a different version for you. It should still work with no problems. Another thing you implicitly installed with that is a command called npm. So you can also call npm-v, and you can see that you also get a version number there. The other thing we have to install is Visual Studio Code, which, as I mentioned, is a code editor, which is free. So you can either go to the Visual Studio Code website, which is code.visualstudio.com, and download it for your operating system. Or alternatively, again, we can just use Homebrew, so brew install visual-studio-code. And in this case, it takes a second because while I already had it installed, it found a new version, which is great. So I'll immediately get the update, hopefully. And yeah, so after that has run successfully, you should be fully set up to get started with the other two methods of developing add-ons. Now that we have Visual Studio Code installed, I have opened it up, and I have actually opened a new folder I've created called Express Add-Ons. This folder can be called anything you like using the open folder thing right here and just selecting our empty folder. Now you can go over to Terminal and click on New Terminal to open a Terminal tab within this very folder. With this Terminal tab, you can now just enter npx @adobe /create-ccweb-add-on and specify a name for your add-on. So in this case, let us call it Rectangle Creator and press enter. This will now guide you through a process of creating this add-on. In this case, I don't want to send analytics to Adobe. You can select one of the templates for your add-on. So you have various templates here. In this case, let's just use JavaScript for now. Do we want to include the document sandbox? So this is the API to interact with our document. In this case, yes, because we want to create rectangles. And now this will automatically install all the dependencies you need. And as you can see, it also created this folder Rectangle Creator with our code. So let's just wait a second until this is completed. And now we would need to set up trusted SSL certificates. So let's automatically set them up. Yes, automatically set them up, please. We need to enter our administrator password. Do it again. Once again. Once again. And now we should be ready to go. So let's follow the steps here. Go to cd rectangle creator, run npm run build, and then npm run start. It now says that our add-on Rectangle Creator is hosted on localhost 5241. So let's copy this over, and then over in Adobe Express, you can actually go back to the switches we already discovered, enable add-on testing, enter the address here, so this should be correct with localhost 5241. Select I understand the risks of loading an add-on from an external server. So basically with this you're confirming that yes, I understand that this code that I'm hosting somewhere could do all kinds of things to my document, deleting everything and stuff like that, and then connect. And now you can see that our rectangle is here, our Rectangle Creator, and also appears in our Your Add-ons tab. You can then go to the add-on, and as you can see, we once again have our create rectangle function, which can then create rectangles. Once again, let's do the same thing as we just did over on the other side. In this Rectangle Creator folder, we have a source folder, which then contains our index.html. So here we can already change this to create ellipse. And then in the sandbox part, you can see that we have our sandbox things. So over here, we can once again specify create ellipse. And then it automatically detected that we did some changes to the code. So you can see rebuilding source directory source to dist done. And hopefully, yeah, as you can see, we don't need to do anything else. We already have these changes reflected. And if I now delete the rectangle and click on create ellipse, we can actually create our ellipse. So with that, really, it's not that much more difficult than with the code playground, except that you have to install these local apps. Now you can really do all kinds of stuff in here. So for example, we could say that we also want to adjust the color a little bit, give it a little bit more green, and rebuild it. So let's create it again, and we have a little bit more green in there. To get an overview of all the different functions you have available, you can actually go over to the documentation page, which is developer.adobe.com/express/add-ons/docs. And then over in SDK references, you can find a list of all the various classes and functions and so on you have available. So for example, here we have some interfaces. We have the fill, which we use, so you can actually see that on this type fill that we create down here with make color fill, we could now look at the color of this, which then corresponds to this color field right here. So color field, fill, and then you can see all the various APIs you have available. So it really makes sense to look into the kinds of things you can do and maybe even draw some inspiration from some APIs you see. That's at least how I always tend to build my plugins and add-ons. The first bit of inspiration actually comes from looking at what APIs are available and then thinking about what could I do with those that is either creative or useful, or ideally both. The third option we want to discuss today, Bold Express, is probably the best option for you if you're already a somewhat experienced developer who just wants to get started building for Express, but who's already quite familiar with code, and if you also don't want to tinker around with completely customizing your development environment. Essentially, what Bold is, it is a boilerplate for creating add-ons which already has things included like your favorite library, may that be Svelte, React, or Vue.js, TypeScript, Sass, and all these kinds of things. And also provides some niceties like type safety around the document sandbox APIs, which you can then just import. If you want to learn more about Bold Express and all the ins and outs of it, there is actually already a video created by the creator of Bold Express himself, Justin Taylor, a fellow developer from our add-on developer community, who explained in this very video, which will also be linked in the description below, all things around Bold Express. Now, I wish you all the best for the development journey of your first add-on for Adobe Express. Don't get discouraged if it feels complicated at first, or you might have to spend some time debugging. That's quite normal and to be expected. And if you get stuck, Adobe hosts monthly office hours where you can ask any questions you might have. If you later decide to publish your first add-on, please post a link into the comments below. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you can come up with using these APIs. In the coming weeks, I'll also host a series of live streams where I'll migrate my Lorem Ipsum plugin for Adobe XD over to Adobe Express, up to and including publishing it. So maybe we'll see each other there. Either way, good luck, have fun coding, and have a great day.